Hi everyone, this is Tom. I'm back. Another rainy day here in New York, so I thought I would do another urban drawing for you. Drawing, painting. I say drawing because I want to get into that. I think today I'm going to do a bit of an amalgam between graphite sketching and watercolor wash. At least that's my goal. As far as a subject, this, it's a photo obviously, but we're in Union Square here in New York City. Specifically this building, although it isn't really the subject of the painting, it's certainly prominent. It is the old Union, I think it's the Union Savings Bank, 1905, a very rigid neoclassical building by the architect Henry Bacon, I believe. Anyway, it's a very classical, gorgeous, perfectly proportioned, again, a neoclassical building in here in New York. Why I say this isn't really the subject of the painting is those of you who know my work or are getting to know it know that I try very hard not to draw specific people, places, and things. What I try to do is to paint my impressions, interpretations, my real personal, genuine, authentic experiences of those people, places, and things. And I'm going to try to walk you through my process today, again, a bit more in depth. I think all of us, when we're trying to develop a way to paint, I'm trying to explain this coherently, but I think for me, I painted for many years before I began to find my voice, if you will. And by my voice, people use that phrase liberally, but what that means, what it means to me, is finding your unique point of view, the way you paint that is unlike how anybody else does. By definition, that's what we all do, whether we know it or not. Even if we're really busy copying somebody else, we are always and only ever painting like ourselves. For me, I think when I was coming up, I still do this. When I see somebody else having produced an amazing work, the sort of rote initial feeling is, oh my gosh, that's an amazing painting. I would love to do that, or I could never do that. The point is, we waste a lot of time. We spin our wheels comparing ourselves to others unnecessarily. It was quite a breakthrough moment when I realized that what a waste of time that was, and how, in point of fact, I could spend the rest of my life comparing myself to this painter or that artist. She can do something I could never do. He paints in a way I never could. Yeah, that's true. But you know what? Neither can those people paint the way you can. And I think when we embody that, when we take that realization on board, we really start, or at least it's the beginning, of our being able to trust ourselves, to listen to our own voice, to tune out all the negativity and the doubt, and really start following your own instincts. When you do that, you begin to gravitate not only how you want to paint, but why you want to paint in the first place. It informs the subjects you may choose to paint. It informs the subjects you may choose not to paint. Again, when I was beginning, I went to a lot of art shows, and I think without even knowing it, I noticed the kinds of paintings, or perhaps the subjects of paintings that others were doing, and assumed that, oh, well, if I want to get in this show or that, or if I want to become better or successful, I have to paint in this manner, in this style, using this paper, these pigments. I have to paint these subjects, not those subjects. Oh my God. No. By making endless mistakes, really the hard way, I slowly discovered, no. My paintings only succeed when they are about something I feel strongly about, something to which I have a connection, something that means something to me personally. So I try very hard not to pay too much attention to what other people are painting, and quite literally how they're painting. You can notice, of course, you can pick up tips here and there, but people often ask me, what's your best advice for aspiring painters? And smart ass that I am, but I mean this. I say, don't take too much advice. And I do mean that. Listen, people know what they're talking about sometimes, so it's perfectly fine to listen. But in the end, you have to decide what you want to paint, how you want to paint, what materials, paper, brushes, pigments make sense for you to fall in line with how you want to paint. Anyway, that's a lot of philosophy, but it's very important to me because I think it breaks my heart. I teach so much, and aspiring painters and students almost without fail ask me the same set of questions. What paper do you buy? What glue did you use? What brushes are best? Those questions are interesting, but they're not important. I keep waiting for students to ask me things like, why did you want to become a painter in the first place? What is it about painting that enhances your life or you find so compelling? What is it about the subjects that attract you that gets you further down the road toward being the artist you want to be? Those types of questions are the worthy ones. You know, what paper somebody uses, it's interesting again, but it isn't really very important. I don't mean to diminish it. In a medium like watercolor, we have so few materials that the actual materials are important, but they're just on the list of important questions to ask, and in my view, nowhere near the top. Anyway, what am I doing here? I am doing what I almost always do, which is to study my subjects and my sketchbook first. The sketchbook for me is essential. It's where I get my thinking out of the way. I'm not the brightest bulb, but it helps me. I think all of us, we're so bombarded with visual information that it's just a great way to peel away what's not necessary, to emphasize what is necessary, to more practically fix on a composition, a hierarchy of important elements, formatting, how much do you want to leave in, how much you may want to crop away, etc., etc. I am working, as you can see from this reference photo. Now, those of you who study with me know that I am very adamant about the downsides of working with reference photos. I don't ever say don't do it, but I just say that if you can't draw from life or from a sketch you've done from life, a reference photo can be your friend, but it can also be your enemy. It can also get in the way. It can also dilute what you're trying to say, because a photograph has a way of emphasizing everything in your point of view. This cab is just as important as the sky. The building is just as important in the foreground as this building in the background. By that I mean the colors are as saturated, the values are as dark, etc. I don't think there are many photos, this is certainly an example of that you could translate one-to-one to make a great painting. If I did that, I might end up with a competent painting, but I wouldn't end up with anything approaching art or anything that spoke to anyone, let alone me. So no, a reference photo is a help, but it's just the beginning. It's just a step. I try to do a sketch and then hide my reference photo from myself so that I don't get tempted as I'm painting to go back and copy too many details or mimic to exactly what I might see in the reference photo. I could talk for hours on that, but I won't. This was a black and white version of the original photo I took. I did do a bit of cropping before I printed it, because before my brush ever touches paper, I'm thinking about what it is I want to focus on. I'm going to back up a second, and those of you who, again, who've studied with me before know this little list probably very well. I have in my brain 4 basic considerations that I ask myself before I do any painting. These are in order of importance. What I call them are the 4 basic design elements to make a good painting. It doesn't ensure that you're going to do a great painting, but it's, for me, definitely a help. Are these the only ones? Is this the correct list? No, it's just a list. It's my list. You're welcome to it. I didn't invent any of these topics. You can borrow it, you can steal it, you can have it. But I guess I urge you to think about this, to ask yourself, what are your main considerations before you start a painting? It's just worth it. It's even good if you look at my list and say, nah, not for me. I have a better list. That's great. That means you already have a point of view developing, or maybe well underway. That's great. But me, first thing I ask myself when I decide I want to do a painting of anything, what's my intention? That might sound simple, but when you peel back the layers on that, it starts to look murky. What do you mean? What is your intention? That means to me, why is it I decided to do this painting as opposed to going to a movie or having drinks with my friends or watching Netflix or read a book or anything else? Why did I decide I needed to do a painting of any given subject? You might not have an absolute answer for that, and that's okay. But I think there's going to be something just in the asking of that question that's going to get you further down that road toward being able to develop a point of view. Specifically in this, what I like about this painting is that it speaks to my way into art in general. I don't wander through the world looking for pretty things to paint or interesting subjects to paint. That isn't how I look at the world. I notice things. I don't want to say I don't notice objects or things or people. Of course I do. But as far as interpreting those experiences into paintings, what I notice are contrasts. The idea of contrast is my way into art. By contrast, I mean, of course, light versus dark, sure, but I really mean the broader issue of 2 opposite things, 2 opposite forces almost, clashing on the surface of the paper. Light versus dark, vertical energy versus horizontal energy, the solid object versus the negative space, so solid and void. I start to notice, I don't want to say philosophical, but broader issues like the old versus the new, the past versus the present, the passing of time. All of these things come into my mind when I decide if a subject is worthy or not for me to spend my time painting it. I think we should all do that. So what I love about this is a very rigid, rational, highly architectural, beautiful old neoclassical building, but it's in Union Square, which is a very kind of hodgepodge of buildings and things, and the streets are not rectilinear, and there's a lot of clashing of energy, of styles, of times, of colors, of values, of everything. New York in particular is just a place I love because it's really just filled with all those clashes that excite me as an artist. Those are the things I want to paint. not a pretty building, but this idea of contrast, of conflicting forces meeting on the surface of the paper, hopefully to find a harmonious, or sometimes not, resolution, and sometimes not a resolution. It depends on the experiential input you as an artist bring to it and what you want to transmit to the viewer. That's your intention. So that's what I see here. This clashing of these beautiful classical elements with the more utilitarian light standards, walking signs, traffic signs, scaffolding. The street is all torn up, which I don't intend to paint, but it's just part of the ambiance of this whole painting. This would be a great subject to do plein air. Kind of hope to do that, but a little rainy and cold for that now. So you're stuck with me here in the studio. Then I may get to think, all right, that's a good intention. My second question is, well, composition. How do I want to arrange the pieces of my intention, the story I want to tell, the visual pieces on a piece of paper? This is where I start to think about formatting. Do I want to show a more horizontal ground plane composition, a more vertical composition? Any composition you tell, if it isn't round or square, has a dominant energy. A vertical composition pulls the viewer's eye up and down through the painting and sets up connections. Connects the earth to the sky, heaven and earth. It's just a beautiful built-in narrative you're going to have with any vertical composition. It's always in the back of my head when I do a composition that's vertical. I know they tend to be broader, possibly more aspirational. A lot of lyrical, poetic ideas can dart through your mind, which may or may not be useful, but they're there. A horizontal composition, by contrast, would emphasize the ground plane. It does set up connections, left and right, right and left, but keeps the viewer's eye and the viewer's spirit grounded along the horizon line and on the ground plane. Very appropriate way to paint. Not right for the subject, in my opinion. I want to set up this verticality energy as dominant. Secondarily, the horizontal. And third, the diagonal. I'll get more into that later. Yeah, I don't want to go too more in depth than that. But once you get a basic composition in mind, the third question I ask myself are values. Paintings fail, in my opinion, for a number of reasons, but probably high up on the list, if not number one, is that they don't have a dominant or a coherent value design, a clear range of values from darkest darks to lightest lights. I don't want to go and waste all of our time going too much in depth on that, though I certainly could. But values in a painting are more key to its success, I believe, than virtually anything else. Especially when you're interpreting a reference photo, where, as I said earlier, the values in the distance, the sky, the foreground, the background, the foreground, the midground, they're all pretty uniform. I don't think you can do that. You can, but I wouldn't recommend it. I think if you want to imply this illusion of three dimension and depth and perspective in your work, it's something you should consider. The easiest, most poetic, and successful, in my opinion, way to do that is by designing your values so that you get a dynamic range of values from lightest lights to darkest darks. If you fade out elements that are in the distance, they're automatically going to look farther away. If you beef up elements in the foreground, they're automatically going to look closer to you. That's not the only thing that should go through your mind, but it's definitely one. Another thing is, what is your focus of the painting? What is your center of interest going to be? A reference photo really throws you off because the background buildings, the taxi, the shadow, the sky, everything screaming out for attention. For a well-designed painting, I think you have to choose. You could make a painting here all about the ground plane. That'd be very valid. You could make a painting here all about the sky. Maybe not in this format, but you could definitely do that. I want to do a painting about, not about only, but the center of focus for this painting, I want it to be here. Because it's a vertical format, I want to put the center of interest higher up in my work to pull the viewer's eye up. What this tells me, if that's true, is the center of focus for this painting is going to be roughly up here in the sky. In my center of focus, that's where my crisper edges, higher level of detail, if I need any, will be. My more saturated colors, my deeper values, harder edges, as I say, all of the heat is going to go up here. Everything in this painting that radiates out from that point will become progressively and progressively less saturated, less hard-edged, not gone necessarily. Some things may be edited out, but played down, I guess. I want to raise the viewer's eye to fall here. Wherever in your painting the darkest dark meets the lightest light, that is the first place the viewer's eye is going to automatically, anatomically be attracted to go. You just can't help it. That's fantastic to know that, because it means as the artist, you have the ability to orchestrate what the viewer looks at first, second, third, and so on. So if you identify your center of focus, put your energy there, fade out everything else, man, you are way down the road to making a good painting, at least a successfully designed one that's going to emphasize your intention, codify your composition, clarify your design, give a structure to your values, and everything should fall in place. It also makes it a great deal easier to do large paintings, larger paintings anyway. If you feel trapped into always doing small paintings, you can do a very large painting with just one area perhaps where there's a lot of crispness, saturation, bits of detail if you need it. The rest of the painting can be very impressionistic, loose, washy, and anyway, that's another topic, but yeah, it's quite possible. I'm only saying these things because I think we sometimes work very hard, but we don't always work very smart. And I think, for me, when I came upon this as a way to organize my paintings, it just made everything easier and more fun. So as I say, I'm not going to not include the ground plane here. You could do a painting just about the tops of buildings and then fade everything out completely. That's a valid way to paint, and I've done that quite a few times. I don't want to do that here. What I want to do is include the ground plane, the scaffolding, some people on the street, probably some cars, probably not that one, but simplify them and fade them out so they're kind of ghosty, they're there, but they don't scream out and call for too much attention. So for my value compositional sketch here, I'll just scrumble some ideas of things there. This kind of tells me all I need to know. And also I teach myself. I put a little too much value in these water towers and distant buildings that I do want to include because they're just texturally enlivening for the whole composition, and they help me emphasize my intention of the clashing of times and styles that's so characteristic of New York. But I don't want them to be that dark or dominant. So this little sketch, it's not a nice drawing, it's just an informational drawing. It tells me that when I do the actual drawing, I'm going to fade these out a bit more than I have. Background building, do want it there, but fade it out even more. I want a gradual increase in values from the distant all the way up to the center of focus right there. I could do more on this, but I don't see any need to. So I'm just going to jump onto the final drawing. I drew a couple of light perspective lines just to speed things up here, but I don't want this to look too technical, so I'm going to freehand over that. I don't recommend using straight edges. Not ever, but you can just become overly reliant on them, and it's not wrong. Nothing is wrong. I don't mean to say that. It's just they become a crutch, and you can end up with the drawings that are much too dry, tight, and technical looking. I allowed myself to use a straight edge very lightly under here, just because right here in the center of focus, I want a little bit, as I said earlier, more clarity, a bit more detail and accuracy to fall within this bullseye of interest. But from there out, I'm just going to freehand things in lightly. I'm trying to decide if I'm going to add pencil tone, which I think I mentioned earlier. I might actually, I'm going to see when I get the rest of this drawing sketched out if I think that's a worthy thing to do. I think it may be, but I'm not, if I'm honest, 100% convinced. Technically, what am I working on? This is a piece of Baohong Master's Choice Watercolor Paper, rough surface, 300 gram or 140 pound, so medium thickness. I love the highly textured Baohong. I think when I start to paint, I'll talk more in depth why, but just the grittiness of it, I think, is appropriate for the subject I'm doing. Pencil I'm using is a Blackwing. I love these Blackwing sketch pencils. This is a pearl, the light pearlescent colored barrel. It's a soft lead, but it's not quite as soft as some of the others, and it's just a really beautiful sketch pencil. It's soft, it doesn't scratch your paper, but you can get a very dark line with a little bit of pressure, or a very light line with almost no pressure. Anyway, lovely sketch pencil. Doesn't matter, you can use whatever you like, obviously, but I like these. It looks like I'm outlining shapes, which I am a little bit just here, because again, I want whatever clarity is in this painting to happen here. So I want to be just a little bit more careful. This little bank building is detailed to within an inch of its life. Detail, because it's actually there in a photo, is not required to be included. Another downside of a photograph, it makes you believe, without thinking it through, that every little window, cornice, everything you see in that photograph must be included in your painting. Of course, the answer is no, it doesn't. You are the artist, so you're all powerful. You get to decide. That's part of design. Designing is all about choice. What do you leave in? What do you leave out? What do you play up? What do you play down? What do you emphasize? What do you de-emphasize? That's design, really, because what it does, it organizes your thoughts and your aesthetic, sure, but it also teaches silently the viewer where you want them to look, where you don't want them to look, what you want them to focus on, what you want them to skip over. There's no easier way to get your viewer to skip over something than to just leave it out altogether. It's just great power we have as artists to be able to decide what we want to include and what we don't. So I'm being a little prissy with these Corinthian columns, not because they're there, but right here in this corner, I think they're going to give me the potential of doing a better drawing and a better painting if I include this detail here. When I get to these distant buildings, it'll be a different story. Also, if I'm honest, I love drawing this kind of thing, but that sounds like maybe it's a plus, but it kind of, in my case, is a bit of a minus. I love drawing so much, and I have to monitor, police myself, because of that, I can just overdraw my base drawings in my watercolors, and they can start looking pretty tight pretty quick. Yeah, I do love drawing. I honestly think of watercolor as kind of an act of drawing. You're not drawing with lines necessarily, but you're drawing with shapes of color and value. Oh, it just dawned on me, I didn't discuss the fourth element in my list of my hierarchy of design elements after values is really made it look like an afterthought. It's not. The fourth element is color. Like most of you, I'm guessing, I love color, I do, but I also know, like overdrawing a painting, it can be the wrong emphasis. No color, no matter how beautiful or compelling it is by itself, is necessarily going to work in your painting or improve it, unless that color enhances the overall value design and supports the overall intent of the artist. It's just decoration. So I choose colors very carefully, not because I like them, but because they mix well with other colors, which I'll talk more about in a minute. But just like everything else, as a contrast, I love color, again, not for individual pigment tones, but for how well they mix with other colors. So I think of colors not even really as colors, but as temperatures and as values. Is it a warm? Is it a cool? Is it a dark? Is it a light? That's the way, for me, I think about colors. That really helps me organize my paintings, and I think, for me, works better. There are painters, I know them, who, if they made that little list, after they got done laughing at me, they might make their little list and say, well, he's crazy. Color has to be number one on the list, always. That's fine. If that's true for you, great. Obviously, color carries value. But I think you need to be very, very expert at color as a colorist to be able to also understand the strength of the value color holds. I don't consider myself bad at it at all, but because I deal with complementary colors so much, I use pure colors and allow them to mix on the surface of the paper organically. I rarely emphasize just one color as a structural element. On occasion, but very rarely. It's really the value that they carry that gives them their power. All right, so as far as details, yeah, I think that's okay. I'm still very unclear whether I want to add some pencil toning. I can add it later, but I don't like being this ambivalent. I'm just unsure whether it's going to make the painting better or worse. I think I'll not do it, at least not now. Right, again, I love these old classic wooden water towers that show up all over the New York skyline. I just think they're gorgeous, but partially because they're so somewhat unexpected and kind of haphazard in where they tend to appear. And in a view like this, they can just really animate the skyline in an interesting way. Again, you don't have to include these. You could eliminate them. I love them, so I'm going to. And you also, if you want to include these or anything else, you don't have to put them right where you see them in the photograph. You can enlarge them, you can shrink them, you can move them around, you can leave them out altogether. You are in charge. Again, the whole idea of just recognizing that we paint for ourselves, really. We're painting our own experiences. When you just allow yourself to do that, well, it's very liberating, but it's also just healthy. For me, it was a healthy decision. I cannot tell you how many days, countless hours I spent feeling like trying to teach myself to paint like somebody else, or to be as good at doing this or that as somebody else. And not just in painting, of course, but just in life. Comparing ourselves with others is, if it isn't the worst of sins, it's really high on the list. Because just by doing that, we diminish our own power, we diminish our own worth. Even if we think we're not, that's what we're doing. We're giving up our worth, our power, our instincts to somebody else. If you get to know those somebody else's, those other painters that you admire so much sometimes, that's also had been helpful for me. Then you get to know that, well, they're just people too. They're just figuring it out too. They're going through the same process that you are, deciding what works for them and what doesn't. I mean, not always. There's probably some that think they have all the answers. But I'm pretty sure they don't. I don't think there are answers. I just think there are decisions. An answer for somebody else may not be the answer for you. And what's an answer for you today may not be an answer for you in 2 weeks or tomorrow. Again, that's your choice, your decision. Okay, while I'm doing this, I'm conscious of just talking and drawing, which is not wrong, but I have to start now thinking about some pretty serious editing. What I'm working with here is essentially a one-point perspective. I flattened out most of the elements in this plane, so I'm looking straight at them. I have a single vanishing point I'm working with here off the page, and I didn't construct this, I'm just winging it. This is the horizon line, which is the line at which, if you're walking down the street or standing there, that's where your eyes are going to fall. Generally, if the plane is flat, if the sidewalk is flat, the horizon line is going to be right about where all the people's heads are. Most people are within the same, somewhere between 5 and 6 feet tall, more or less. So most people's eye lines are going to fall pretty near that horizon. That would hold true if there's a foreground figure, very large. This guy or girl, his or her eyes would also be on that horizon. All that assumes this is a flat plane, which it more or less is. It goes uphill a little bit, but not enough to make a big difference. I draw the horizon line first in all of my work. It's just the datum line by which all other visual information radiates. It's the organizing line. I give whole lessons in perspective construction. This is not one of them, but those are just some of the highlights. I've been drawing in perspective for as long as I've been breathing, so it is kind of second nature to me. Doesn't mean I never screw it up, but I love to do it, and I also realize there are conventions and so-called rules, but because of that, and because it's a visual medium, you can bend or break those rules. I don't feel like in a work of art, especially a sketch-based painting, your perspectives have to be necessarily 100% accurate. They just don't. It almost looks bad if they are. It starts looking like a very dry, technical drawing. However, I think your perspectives ought to fall within a bracket of believability. So placing the horizon line just helps me get enough information that things radiate out from that point and start to look realistic. I'm way out of the center of focus up here as I sketch down here, so I have to think about what visual information is important and what I don't think is. I know that I'm going to play up this shadow because it's going to help push the viewer's eye up here into the light. So it'll be a luminous shadow. You'll see some things within it, but a lot of things can tend to fade away from our ability to see them in shadows. Not always, but often. I want to play up the street junk like this road sign or light standard. I'm going to move it a bit so that it falls over here. I guess that's a little mini lesson in drawing a relatively straight line freehand. My recommendation for doing that is, first, don't beat yourself up. Don't try too hard. Second, breathe. Don't hold your breath. But practically, if you see what I'm doing, I'm not drawing with my fingers. I'm holding the pencil steady and pulling my whole arm down through the page, in this case, top to bottom. If you do that, it just helps you make a more nearly straight line. And if you don't focus on where the pencil point is, but rather focus on where you want it to land, wow, that's a huge game changer. If any of you have practiced archery, that idea, or play darts, you know, you don't look at the dart, you look at the dart board. You look at where you want the dart to go before you throw it. Same thing in drawing a line. Don't look at where the pencil is, look at where you want it to go. So I definitely want to play that up. I love this bright little sparkle of some of these signs reading through this dark shadow. I don't have to do that just because it's there on the photo, but I want to do that because I think it'll help reinforce, amplify my overall intention for this painting, which is, again, sort of the clashing of elements over time. The past meets the future. So I just want to be very clear. I'm not adding these things just because they're there in the photo. I can easily edit them away, and I have no hesitancy to do so. But I'm not editing them away because I think they're going to help tell my story and make a better painting. At least better in the sense that it'll be more authentic to what my intention is. The road signs, all this kind of junk, I just think it's going to help the juxtaposition of these messy mechanical bits up against this beautiful neoclassical building. For me, it's the whole ball game. It's just so beautiful in an unexpected way. And here again, I can see some of you watching and saying, well, I don't like all that crap. I wouldn't put all the messy mechanical stuff in. Good, you don't have to. You might do a different kind of painting of this altogether, and it could be just as good as mine or even considerably better. We don't all have to be motivated by the same things. We really don't. And if you find yourself asking yourself, why is he putting in all that mechanical junk? Good, just the fact that you're asking that means that you're beginning to think about what you would do or wouldn't do. And yeah, that's what art is all about. What would I do versus what you would do? What am I trying to say versus what you might be trying to say? In all of that, that's our own unique artistic voices speaking up, making themselves known. And to me, that's what's exciting about not just visual arts, drawing and painting, but life, actually, in general, but certainly art. In music, two equally skilled musicians could look at the same piece of music and interpret it in very different ways, both of them successful, and neither one are wrong. It's just different ways. Anyway, for my painting, I think that's really going to enhance it. I think the fact that these mechanical things are organized on this vertical line is also fortunate. If they weren't, I'd probably move them so that they were, to help emphasize the vertical energy of this painting, and again, to help set up this clash between the rigor and the rationality of the beautiful classical architecture and the casual, efficient, utilitarian nature of these light poles and road signs. Quite often I will get commentary online, on social media, from people who might like a painting I did. Of course, that's always gratifying to hear, but then they say, I'm going to try to copy it and do my version of it. Look, I don't mind. It's not like a proprietary thing. I don't care if you want to copy my painting, go for it. But it does break my heart a bit that people that say that, I really think, are just missing the bigger point. Why would you want to do that? What are you going to learn about painting? You might learn a bit about just how to push paint around the paper, and if you're really just a beginner, that can be useful. But if you're really earnest about wanting to be a painter, don't do that. Take my ideas to heart, if you will, and then go out and find something that really sings to you and paint that instead. But again, If you're just a real novice and just learning how to move paint around, then sure, it can be helpful. As an art student, we spent a lot of time copying great masters. And I remember even as a teenager back then thinking, why are we doing this? I mean, I guess we're studying composition, lighting, and the manipulation of paint, I guess. But it always seemed a particularly inefficient way to learn. Well, it was for me anyway. But we don't all teach the same. We don't all learn the same. And I am respectful of that. And I don't mind if you want to do it. You'll see I have reinterpreted this large vertical element, and I brought it right up off the page. It's not very realistic, but I think it'll make a better painting. It'll also give me a little bit of a foreground element there to play with. There's scaffolding here. Again, I have the ability, of course, just to leave it off, but I love the scrappy utilitarian nature of this, these street canopies with all the steel and metal girding. They're very utilitarian, and just the juxtaposition of that with the again, the beautiful, more rigid architectural elements, I think is something I want to play up. So I don't need to be terribly faithful to exactly what they look like, this scaffolding and street cover, but I definitely want it in there. It's out of the center of focus, so I'm not going to play it up too much, but I definitely want it there. Now I'm just sort of making up some shapes and potential buildings and things to flesh out the composition here in the distance. It'll be lighter than all this, but good enough. There is another light standard here. Again, sounding like a broken record, but just because it's there, I don't have to put it in, but I do want to, and I actually like where it's located because it's just another sort of callback to this vertical pole, and it also has additional junk street signs and things that I think will juxtapose nicely to this rigid rhythm of beautiful Corinthian columns here. So in it goes. Oh, also it has the benefit of covering up somewhat the facades of these neighboring buildings, which will make it easier for me to edit out most of the windows in detail that you see there. So I'm being a little bit faithful to this, but only because I just love the shapes that are there. So stoplight, street signs. I don't know how many of you have driven around New York City, but there's so many street signs. It's virtually impossible to see them and read them, and I'm always getting in trouble. You know, park, don't park. One way, that's an important sign though to notice. Although that said, I've made that mistake before, and if you do, it's pretty obvious that you've made a mistake. Cars careening down the road at you, honking their horns is a dead giveaway, so stop and reconsider. Okay, again, I'm loving drawing this, but I don't want to overcook it. Everything's pretty light, so no worries, but I think I want to consider how many figures, people, and that sort of thing I want to add. A few, again, not because they're there, but just to add sort of what I call the beautiful chaos of New York. Also, there are vehicles. And while I'm drawing and talking, I'm thinking about how many of them I want to include, if any, where do I want them to be, and how do I want to handle them. So figures in this drawing, it's a sketch, so they shouldn't be overly detailed in general, but also because they're so far out of the center of focus, I want them to just be schematic, to add texture and a sense of scale perhaps, but I don't want to get into little miniature portraiture and figure drawing. To make them too specific would be a mistake, is what I'm saying. I want to do some lessons here on a lot of things. But drawing people, figures, is one. I think in a sketch drawing, a couple little tips helped me. If you can get this sort of little triangle of anatomy, the head, the sense of the neck, and the shoulders, and a relatively realistic, just that much. The body can just hang off of it in a couple of brush strokes or pencil marks, and that's enough to tell you that that's a human. You don't need much more than that. But I would say in looking at, jurying, and critiquing a lot of drawings with a lot of strange looking human figures in, one thing, for whatever reason, people tend to forget is that most people, have shoulders. So just a couple little tick marks where the figure's shoulders would be is just critical, so that they don't look like alien beings. More or less, as you can see, I'm placing the figure's heads on or near the horizon line, just so that they look as if they're walking along a flat ground plane. As we get further away, I'm just scribbling a few just to add a sense of an idea of texture and population. I'm fairly ambivalent on cars, if I want any at all. Do I really think? I sort of do, just to sort of junk up the street and help emphasize that story of past and present. On the other hand, I don't want any vehicles to take away from the center of focus. So with all that bearing down on me, I will just indicate a couple of cars, but in the most loose, schematic way possible. So they're there, but not really there. Definitely this big yellow cab goes away. He doesn't really help. However, I do want to put a car a little further down the street on the road, just to flesh out the composition here. Cars are notoriously difficult to draw, or they can be, because they're mechanical, and even though they look like they might have a lot of straight lines, they don't really. They're deceptively curvilinear. There's almost no straight lines. And you can go very wrong. You can be doing a nice, loose, fluid sketch, and then you come up against a vehicle or a tree or a person or something that's very specific. And the tendency is just to screw down, tighten up, and you end up doing a very, very rigid, technical looking vehicle, and that's not cool. So just keep it loose. Don't feel the need to draw absolutely everything. Just imply. I think that's probably enough. I'm going to just allow the painting to bleed off the page down here. Relatively happy with the sketch. I think I have decided not to do pencil tone up here at the top, rather to keep it all in tones of watercolor. I hate to be so publicly ambivalent, but it's okay. When I was in my mind thinking about doing this, I was thinking of doing it 1/3 pencil and 2/3 watercolor, but now that I'm seeing it closer to reality, I think, although that would work, I think it might be more beautiful if it's all watercolor. Then I can play up some deep luminous shadows, and if I cover that with pencil, they're going to be too gray too quickly. Which for some paintings would be fine, but for this guy, I think not. A few tick marks here just to imply some window wall in this distant building. Doesn't need a lot, get the idea. Yeah, because my former career was an architectural illustrator, not a shock to anybody who doesn't know that. But leaving a window out or doing anything inaccurate was not an option. It suited me because I love being precise and drawing all these little details. It's very therapeutic. But as I morphed into trying to become a fine artist, I had to learn the hard way that that's not always a good thing to do. Paintings are often much stronger when you don't show everything, but you just imply things and allow the viewer's eye or imagination to fill in the blanks, if you will. You know, the human brain's incredible. You could, paint an entire wall if you just show one window, or even none at all, just a little texture in the way you paint. It can imply a world of detail that's really not there at all. But the human brain can fill in the blanks, connect the dots. And it's also a great way to involve your viewers with your work by not giving them everything, but making them sort of become involved in the process of trying to find it. That was a hard thing for me to realize. More detail, more specificity does not always make a better drawing or painting. Quite the opposite sometimes. It can make a much more static, less interesting piece of work. Okay, assessing where I am, pretty happy with the overall composition of shapes of things on the paper. All looks pretty good. So now, no pencil tone, so it's time for color. I'm going to stop recording now. I'll prepare my palette and then I will be back momentarily.